When you are running a game focused on exploration, one of the most important things is the environment that the characters explore. In some cases, characters might travel through many different terrain types, but some games can be focused on one specific terrain type. Both approaches have their own merits. The first one is more diverse, and the second one allows the GM and the players really emphasize the special features of that particular terrain type. The survival skill description lists the following common land terrain types: Arctic, desert, island/beach, jungle, mountain, plains, swampland, and woodlands. It also has a list of aquatic specialties and suggests some more exotic terrain types. So where do you find terrain rules in GURPS? There are no environmental supplements like in D&D 3.5, so whatever rules you've got, you'll have to compile from GURPS basic set, GURPS Dungeon Fantasy 16 Wilderness Adventures, and other sources. Dungeon Fantasy 16 has plenty of environmental hazards and other rules, but I will emphasize something that I love about GURPS in this video. You are not limited to just GURPS plot books. Remember I mentioned D&D 3.5 environmental books? You can give them a read and easily adapt the rules or concepts from them for your GURPS game. Dungeon Fantasy 16 mostly focuses on grounded rules that are more or less realistic, while all the D&D supplements can give you many ideas for fantastical environments that will definitely be memorable. So before I get to the actual environments, I want to show you some D&D books that can enhance your exploration games. The first and the oldest book I'd like to recommend is AD&D Wilderness Survival Guide. This book has everything about exploration and survival for your AD&D game. While most of the mechanics already have their GURPS counterparts, this book is nonetheless an interesting read. What I like the most about it is that it describes how infravision works in conjunction with different temperatures and clothing. If you'd like to know more about infravision, I highly recommend the Sight in the Darkness article from Dragon Magazine 211. It talks about infravision in much more detail than any GURPS supplement does. If you'd like to know how to build your wilderness areas, I highly recommend AD&D World Builder's Guidebook. This is an extremely well-written world-building book. I used it to create my own campaign setting, and I believe that this book is much better than almost anything written on this topic nowadays. If you'd like something written for a modern D&D edition, then an unusual suggestion would be the Book of Vile Darkness. First, I know that D&D 3.0 is not modern anymore, but it is to me. Second, it has a short chapter on evil weather. Such supernatural weather conditions can add some flavor to tainted places of your campaign setting. Technically, you don't really need this book. I have converted these weather effects in one of my blog posts. The link is in the description. Then we have the environmental books: Frostburn, Sandstorm, and Stormwrack. They can give you a lot of ideas for Arctic, desert, and aquatic environments respectively. These three books are among my favorite D&D 3.5 supplements. Yet again, I have converted all the weather conditions and environmental hazards on my blog. Links are in the description. Some people consider Cityscape and Dungeonscape to be environmental books as well, but instead of Dungeonscape, I would like to point out the supplement called Underdark. While it is made with Forgotten Realms in mind, it has a lot, and I mean a lot, of useful information for running underground games. If you combine it with GURPS Underground Adventures and GURPS Dungeon Fantasy 2 Dungeons, I am sure you won't be able to find anything these books lack. Pathfinder RPG has a book about Wilderness too, Ultimate Wilderness. What intrigues me the most about it are the exploration rules. They are a bit gamey, but I think they would work great in a hex crawl game. Check this book out. I think that the exploration rules are available on the SRD website for free. I think they should be easy to adapt to GURPS. Finally, I'd like to plug two third-party supplements for D&D 3.0. The first one is Wildscape by Fantasy Flight Games. This one talks about wilderness games and every environment type in great detail, and also suggests some supernatural variants of the environments. For example, a desert composed of metallic particles or bone dust. The mere presence of such terrain in your world will excite the imagination of your players. What could have caused a desert of bone dust to appear? Was there an ancient war that lasted for centuries in this place? The second supplement is Wilds by Alderac Entertainment Group. This book yet again discusses everything about exploration and survival, and has chapters devoted entirely to specific terrain types. It's a great read. This company, generally speaking, produces poor D&D rules, but also is a treasure trove of interesting ideas to adapt to your GURPS games. With books out of the way, let's talk about the environments. This time I will not just provide my own thoughts. Most of the work is already done, but not by me. Mailanka, who is the most prolific GURPS blogger, has a series of posts on his blog about different terrain types. While they are written in the context of his Psy-Wars setting, they definitely work for fantasy games. So let's look over these posts and see what they got in store. I will link them all in the description, so give them a read. The first terrain type is Arctic. Obviously, you will have to familiarize yourself with the cold rules. Because of the cold, you're probably going to find many creatures with thick fur in the Arctic, and whatever people live there will try to stay in shelter and go outside wearing only a lot of clothes. Foraging is difficult. The average foraging modifier from Dungeon Fantasy 16 is -4, and tracking is difficult as well because of snowfalls quickly concealing any signs of passage. Mechanically complex equipment can freeze up in such conditions. Most Arctic environments are deserts, so you're likely to encounter wind. Wind not only will obscure vision with all the snow around you, but will also lower the effective temperature even further. Snowfalls also penalize vision, and blizzards make vision very difficult. Snow is difficult terrain that makes movement slower and penalizes most actions, unless you have the appropriate sure-footed perk or the terrain adaptation advantage. Ice makes things even worse, because you really do not want to slip and fall in combat. Personally, I think that the rules for sleeping on ice are not harsh enough. People in real life often break limbs when they sleep on ice. I would suggest treating this as a fall that deals 1d-4 damage to a random hit location if standing, or 1d-2 damage if running, just like the rules for bolas and lasso suggest. Alternatively, you can treat it as thrust -2 damage, like Fantastic Dungeon Grappling does for damaging throws. But in any case, it is absolutely fine to just keep things as is. GURPS does not have rules for snow glare and snow blindness. But it's very nice to see Mailanka come up with some. This will make such traits as protected vision or robust vision more important even without vision-based attacks. It might seem counterintuitive, but it's also possible to get sunburned in the Arctic due to ultraviolet light. Typical Arctic hazards are snow avalanches, sinkholes, and thin ice. Frostburn for D&D 3.5 has several new varieties of supernatural snow and blizzards. I remember running a D&D game set in the Arctic environment, and I was planning to run a similar GURPS game, but it never happened. Maybe someday in the future. Settlements in such environments usually are small, as there's not enough food to feed a large population. However, if a large settlement does arise, you could end up in a situation where a drastic change of pace or setting can happen. For example, the characters may adventure outdoors during a warm season, but once the blizzards become regular, traveling becomes all but impossible. This can be played out as a long period of downtime when characters can study skills, craft equipment, get jobs, or enchant magic items. Or it could serve as an opportunity to shift the game from being focused on exploration to being focused on social interaction and other urban activities. Arctic environments also let you use skills that you probably wouldn't get a chance to use otherwise, such as skiing or skating. You also get some relatively exotic vehicles of choice, such as dog sleds or even wind-powered ice skidders. Fantasy monsters of the Arctic often are large and primordial, such as mammoths, linorms, huge whales, or worms. It is also often home to various unique undead creatures that arise from those who freeze to death. Archmages or leeches might choose such isolated environments to avoid being bothered by others. Humanoids are often primitive. This is where you can have various barbarian tribes and even caveman cultures. You could also emphasize the use of non-metallic materials such as bone, teeth, and horns. GURPS Low-Tech has rules for weapons and armor from such materials. Overall, I really like the Arctic environment, and I believe that it is definitely not as boring as it might seem to some people. The next environment is on the opposite side of the temperature spectrum, desert. Temperature doesn't really have anything to do with deserts. A desert is any arid environment. There are cold, temperate, and hot deserts, but people usually think about hot deserts, so you might want to familiarize yourself with the heat rules. And of course sunburn. Sun can also produce glare. However, many deserts also get very cold at night, so you might want to get familiar with the cold rules as well. Water consumption is increased in hot climates, and even further increased in hot deserts. Finding water, however, could be a problem. The survival and prospecting rolls to find water do not take the +10 bonus in the desert. Foraging is difficult too, as there's not much vegetation. Another problem is sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating and it gets everywhere. Not all deserts are sandy, however. Loose sand counts as bad footing that penalizes attacks and defenses. Tracking rolls also take a -2 penalty. Heat and sand also may negatively affect your equipment, especially if it is mechanically complex. If the weather is windy, and wind is common in deserts, then you are bound to have some vision penalties due to all the dust and sand in the air. There are other environmental hazards typical for deserts, such as sinkholes, stinging plants, swarms of insects, quicksands, and tornadoes. Sandstorm for D&D 3.5 also has many other hazards that can make your desert more fantastic. I have run a GURPS game set in a desert not long ago. It was about dwarven merchants traveling between oasis cities on dune sailors, sandy variants of the wind sailors from GURPS not Dungeon Fantasy, GURPS Fantasy Tech 1. The next biome is island/beach. Islands can be very different, from frozen islands in the Arctic seas to tropical reef islands. I assume that the survival specialty covers the interface area, where both land and water come together, and if you get further away from the water, you have to use a different survival specialty. The only common thing between all the different islands is the presence of water. You are likely to interact with water somehow, be it swimming, boating, or sailing. If you'd like to know more about rules for underwater activities, then check out Pyramid 326. Food is often abundant. Foraging rolls take no penalty, but sand and waves make tracking more difficult. Sand can be an issue too, just like in the desert, but there's not as much of it on the beach. Most of the other hazards are related to sand, water, and wind. Mailanka lists freak wave, lightning strike, quicksand, and tornado. Islands, in my opinion, are distinct not because of the environment, but because of the isolated ecosystem. If you do not know where to place some very weird creature you found in one of the monster manuals, Just put it on an island, it will fit right in. I remember reading a fascinating blog post about generating island ecosystems. It was based around generating an encounter table for a normal ecosystem, then randomly choosing which entries to remove, and then choosing which of the remaining creatures would adapt to fill the ecological niche created by the creatures that have died out. I would post a link to this post if I had it. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. The next terrain type is jungle. Jungles are thick, hot, and wet. Traditionally, this is where many diseases and poisons can be encountered, so make sure that characters who have purchased resistance to such maladies actually feel the effect. In the jungles, it is difficult to move because of uneven and slippery terrain. However, this is also a good place to show off some unusual movement modes, such as climbing, brachiating, and even tunneling. Mailanka suggests the following hazards: falling tree, quicksand, sinkhole, stinging plants, and swarm. But if you want a much more complete overview of the jungle environment, I highly recommend reading the Emerald Hell article from Pyramid 395. It's an interesting read, and incorporating rules from this article definitely will make a game in the jungle feel very different from any other game. Next up are the mountains. This type of terrain comes up often in fantasy games. How many times have you had to go into the mountains to explore an abandoned mine or a dwarven stronghold? Isolated temples and monasteries, dragon lairs, giant castles, all this can be found in the mountains. Vegetation is sparse, so foraging is difficult, and so is tracking. Movement is penalized as well due to most surfaces being uneven and sometimes slippery too. Rain happens in the mountains. Fog also is a normal occurrence, and so is snow very high up in the mountains. This is also the only mundane place where altitude sickness might come into play, so you might want to get familiar with the rules. The following hazards are appropriate to mountainous terrain: falling rocks, avalanches, lava flows, and lightning strikes. I do not really have anything to add here. The next terrain type is the plains. At the first glance, it might seem that it's the most boring terrain type. I guess plain would be a better word than boring. GURPS does not have hills as a separate terrain type, so your plains might feature uneven terrain. Foraging, tracking, and movement are usually easy on the plains, but since there's nothing to break up wind and help with other weather, plains can become awful after a heavy rainstorm. If you want to emphasize the special features of plains, try to play up the openness. You have nowhere to hide, making camps an attractive choice for raiders. Also, this is where you can introduce mounted combat, because normal mounts are the most effective in this terrain. Aside from bad weather, you might encounter fires, lightning strikes, stampedes, stinging plants, swarms, and tornadoes on the plains. You might want to take a look at some of the books I mentioned in the beginning of the video. There might be some more ideas there. Then we have the Swampland. This is a very difficult terrain type, probably on par with the jungles. There are many complications and obstacles in the swamp. First of all, you have a lot of water. It can be shallow, but sometimes it is deep enough to drown. Everything is muddy and slippery, so it is possible to slip and fall into the water. Fantasy swamps are often home to various monsters that lurk in these waters, such as giant frogs or lizardmen. Rain or fog can further impede movement and vision. Tracking is heavily penalized in Swampland, you get -4. Foraging, however, is not difficult. Fantasy swamps often contain various herbs that can be useful for herbalists and alchemists. Other hazards that can be encountered in the swampland are mud flows, quicksands, stinging plants, and swarms. Typically, swamp waters are also diseased. Fantasy swamps can also be acidic or exude toxic fumes. Finally, we have the woodlands. Just like the plains, it's a relatively mundane terrain type for most people. However, forests come in different types: coniferous forests and rainforests, thin forests and dense forests. Overall travel speed depends on the thickness of the forest. Foraging and trekking usually are not penalized. Dense undergrowth might provide movement and combat penalties, and the same can be said for roots that stick out of the ground. Sinkholes, falling trees, what else? Stinging plants and forest fires are typical additional hazards. Rain and fog are common, but wind is broken up by the trees. Even though forests can seem mundane, they do not have to be. You can have primordial forests where entire buildings can be constructed on the branches. You can have diabolically influenced forests that mislead the travelers, or celestial forests that provide respite and, well, maybe improve the regeneration rate. Check out some of the books I've mentioned at the start of the video. They have many ideas that can make forests more distinct. And that's it for this video, and probably for the series as well, because I don't really know what else to discuss about exploration and survival. But if you come up with something to talk about, I definitely will make more videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.